On today's 7th Circle Gaming, we've analyzed the Victorian and Edwardian eras, we've analyzed the ancient Roman Empire, we've analyzed the science fiction future, and now it's finally time to look at the migration and medieval era in Crusader Kings 3. And we get started in this very complicated game with the full disclosure. And please do pause the video if you're interested in reading through all of these, or if you're not, don't pause the video and let's jump right into the screenshots. And the first screenshot that we have to share with you is the in-game rules that establish the situation in the world at the start of a new game. And there are quite a few sort of interesting options that players can explore here, from allowing random assignment of religions to random assignment of ruling dynasties. So if you do pick up the game, do have a nice poke around this, have an explore. There are some interesting things that can happen here. And with that, let's move on, and we're going to talk about the world of Crusader Kings 3 rather than just the rules. Now then, part of the 4 levels of complexity that Crusader Kings 3 has is, at the highest level, the kingdom level. And that's what this screenshot is meant to be illustrative of. This is the world as viewed at the kingdom level. It's also illustrative of the world at the 30,000 or 60,000 foot level. We'll also draw your attention to, at this point, because it is the most simplistic view of the world, to the notifications bar. It's at the top, roughly right corner of the screen, just next to the economic and social indicators. It's more specifically the eye look like diamonds, and then one that looks sort of like a 4-leaf clover, sort of looking thing. Well, next to that is the economic and social indicators, as we've already said, and then following around and down is the menu bar. It's located on the right here, because on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen is the family management, the family line, and the religion, and a couple of other things management screen, but we'll get to that later. For now, we're only looking at the game at the kingdom level. In our next screenshot, which we'll come to right now, we're going to look at the regional and sub-regional level. At this level of management, there's going to be a very big difference between ruling or governing a kingdom and governing a tribe or a jarldom or what have you, or a non-feudal state. And the difference between those is going to be most obvious in one of the buttons that is visible on the right-hand side of the screen, and that is the ability to raise all of the armies as raiders. That basically means being a pirate and collecting all of the loot from a particular city. Players don't necessarily need to declare war on that state, but they can just steal all of their gold. Well, anyway, once a player becomes a feudal state or a kingdom, they no longer have that option. And this is going to be, for those non-feudal states, non-kingdoms, their primary source of income. And with that, let's move on to our next level of complexity, and that's going to be the family line, or the dynastic management. And although there are a couple of other screens that are going to deal with this, the screen that we've chosen to be illustrative of this dynastic management is the traits, or the inherited traits menu. what they call in game the renown. Whatever. Anyway, it's the inherited traits that are passed down from player character to player character. These are purchased with renown points, I believe, and they are going to have various impacts throughout the course of the game. And with that, let's move once again down the ladder to the player character management, which is the fourth and final level of complexity that Crusader Kings 3 is going to have. Just to make the point one more time, really, Crusader Kings 3 is as much about managing a family line as it is about managing a tribe or a kingdom. But that aside, what we're looking at now on the screen is the player character management. On the left-hand side, we're seeing the marital status of the player character. We're also seeing all of the traits that that player character has. And on the right, which are going to be affected by that dynastic traits menu that we saw in our last screenshot. I know this is very complicated. On the right-hand side of the screen, this is really the last bit of complexity that we're going to discuss, is what we would call in other games the perk menu, or the perk menu, wherein players can purchase perks for their particular player character. These are specific to that particular player character and may or may not be inherited by the next player character. And with that, I think we've covered in a very rough way the levels of complexity in Crusader Kings 3, all 4 of them. And let's move on to chapter 1 of our usual discussion, which is immersion. What is the game doing to get players invested into the game world? And here, just because it's a sort of requirement of the genre, the game has earned a 4 out of 15. The presentation is going to be one of the methods that the game uses to get players invested into the game world, and it is a top-down perspective with multiple map modes, and it can be zoomed in or out. The second method that the game is going to be using to get players invested into the game world is player agency. Yes, these will be shaped by the statistics that the game presents, but really it is coming down to the player agency that is more important or more relevant than the statistics, because the game really is trying to emphasize this role-playing aspect more than the statistics, or maximizing, minimizing statistics. So that's why we don't find that the game is using statistics to get players immersed into the game world. Well, enough waffling about that. Finally, the game is going to be using challenge to get players invested into the game world, and this is going to be taking mostly the form of unexpected outcomes. What we might call in another genre a jump scare. When something happens, like opening a box and something jumps out of the box that we weren't expecting, and the player must then react to that either to maximize the impact, minimize the impact, or simply let it go. So, with that, and without wishing to reveal too much more, let's move on to difficulty. And in difficulty, at least, Crusader Kings has earned its 8 out of 15. It has the basic options of easy, medium, hard. There are, as we showed in that first screenshot, the player-defined rules of the world, the impact of which some are going to be more obvious than others. Some seem to be simply there for the amusement of the player. How those are going to affect the world is sort of described only very basically. The game does have a tutorial, but in our experience, we did find it to be somewhat limited, and it provided basic information and then left the player to learn by doing. There are, however, some extensive tooltips available in Crusader Kings 3. The user interface is very complicated. Frankly, there are things that we've seen in other Let's Plays of the game that we were, in all of our evaluation sessions, unable to duplicate, just as an indication of how complex the user interface is. So then, let's move on and discuss the lasting appeal. So, here Crusader Kings 3 has earned a 6 out of 15. And we do want to caveat this with the idea that the player is interested in the core gameplay loop of royal family management. Notice we didn't say kingdom management there, we said royal family management. The game does have some downloadable content available, and it does seem as though the developer is going to have continued support for a fair amount of time going forward. There is mod support, and this certainly could be the game's saving grace, assuming the player is interested in that core management loop. This allows the player to convert the game into many other fantasy genres or address something that they believe to be a shortcoming of the game. There are many factions available to choose from, ranging from full kingdoms to tribes. The game can be played on different difficulty settings and utilizing different rules settings. As we said earlier, there are potentially very interesting, very different outcomes simply by adjusting the rules. So players may find that interesting to play around with. Again, it does seem like there is continued support, and there are multiple starting years for the game, ranging from the early migration period, just at the fall of the Western Roman Empire, all the way to the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. With, of course, the year 1066 forming its own starting block. And with that little Norman bombshell, let's move on and tabulate the game's overall score. Overall, Crusader Kings 3 has earned a 6 out of 15. It could almost be said to be 4 different games, that being the tribe, the kingdom, the family, and the character management. So simply for content availability, assuming the player is interested in that core management loop, is available, and they are very different at each level. Something to very much highlight. The game is very different at each and every level. What we did find during all of our evaluation sessions, and this should all be caveated, is very highly subjective, that we did find that some self-immersion may be required. This will obviously be assisted by the player playing as a faction that they have some ancestral connection to, or they currently reside in a region that is covered by the scope of the game. Finally, in our last point of this very, very complicated game, I know this has gone on for quite a while, is that player interest in the time period will assist immersion. And that's certainly something to say about that we've said about all of the other Paradox games that we've analyzed, but it really applies here. And with that, if you did make it all to the end of the video, congratulations. Thanks very much. This is the end of the video. And I really don't think there's anything else that we could say about Crusader Kings 3. Thanks very much, and from 7th Circle Gaming, goodbye.